Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today is the day. We're going to do a starter guide for the RG35XX line of devices. There are 5 of these altogether. We've got 2 different vertical versions, a horizontal version, a clamshell version, and then also a mini version called the RG28XX. This guide is going to apply to each of these. Now these devices have gained in popularity over the past several months that they've been released, and as a result there's just a lot of community support, to the point where there are 7 different operating systems that you can use on each of these devices. In this video, we're going to talk mostly about the stock operating system, how you can improve that, as well as how you can modify it to improve it even more. And then we'll also talk about one of the many custom firmware options. This one's called KNULLI, which is a fork of Batocera. So in this guide, we're going to show you how to set the device up just from the very beginning all the way to the end with 2 different operating system options. You've got the very easiest one, which will just be the stock operating system it came with. And then also, if you want to try out your own custom firmware, I'm going to recommend KNULLI this time around. Now with that in mind, there are still a ton of different operating system options out there, and I've made a whole written guide to accompany this video. The written guide itself is something like 10,000 words. That's because I walked through every single operating system and how to get it spun up. And so if you want to try something beyond the 2 we're going to talk about in this video, I will have a written guide accompanying it in the video description below. Either way, no matter what RG35XX whatever device that you own, or if Anbernic releases more in the future, this guide is going to have you covered. We got a lot of ground to cover here, and I'm going to try to knock it out as quickly as possible. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, we're going to break up this starter guide into several different chunks. To start, we'll talk about just your various options and accessories that you have when picking up one of these devices. After that, we're going to talk about the stock operating system. That's going to be the OS that comes with the device. And once I've shown you how to get all of that working, we're going to talk about how you can modify the stock operating system to update some of its components. And between these 2 options, you can get a pretty decent setup. After that, we're going to try out some community solutions. We're going to focus mostly on one called KNULLI, which is a fork of Batocera. So I'll walk you through the entire installation and setup process of that one as well. After that, we're going to go over a couple alternative software options too, just so you know the whole range of everything you have to work with. And like I mentioned in the intro, if you want to try out these as well, there will be installation instructions on my website. Finally, after that, we're going to test a couple other things like HDMI and Bluetooth functionality, and then we'll be good to go. To start, let's talk about the current catalog of the Anbernic RG35XX family and which one might be the best fit for you. We'll start with the 35XX Plus. This is an updated version of the original 35XX that came out in 2022. The big difference with this one is that it has a battery compartment on the back, some upgraded buttons, as well as Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Now to make things even more complicated, Anbernic just recently released an update to that old 35XX. They're calling this one the 2024 edition. And this one is pretty confusing. I'm not sure why they made it in the first place. This one has the exact same shell, so no battery compartment and still with those older buttons. And this one also does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but still costs the same as the other model we were just looking at. So between the 2, I would get the one that's called the RG35XX Plus, the one with the battery compartment. Next is my favorite among all of these. It's called the RG35XXH. This one has a horizontal form factor, which I find to be more comfortable. It also has dual analog sticks, which gives you more control options depending on the games that you're playing. And it's also the only device among all of these that has stereo speakers. So I like this one. It's got all the stuff that I like, including Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and HDMI, and really none of the bad stuff either. Now, if you want something a lot smaller and more pocketable, then you have the RG28XX. This one has a 2.8-inch screen compared to the others that are 3.5. And that's really the main selling point of this one. If you want something super small and pocketable, this is the way to go. But bear in mind, this one does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Finally, we've got another favorite. This one is the RG35XX SP. This is a clamshell model after the original Game Boy Advance SP. And this one's pretty awesome as well. I've done a couple videos about it. It has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and that clamshell form factor is pretty enticing as well. And if you want to learn more about any of these handhelds, I've got full reviews on this channel. And so here's a quick wrap up of all the different models. When it really comes down to it, these all have the same chip and mostly the same features. And when it comes to performance, you can expect to play all the way through PS1 with no problem, and you can play a decent amount of Nintendo 64, Sega Dreamcast, and PSP. In terms of price, they're all going to be around the same, somewhere between like $50 and $70 depending on how new the device itself is. And I think the amount of performance and features that you're getting make any of these these devices worth it as long as you like that form factor. Moving on, let's talk about some accessories that you want to get the most out of your device. We're going to start with an HDMI cable. All of these devices are capable of video out, but you need a special cable or adapter. And that's because it doesn't have a regular HDMI port like you'd find on your TV. Instead, it uses what they call mini HDMI. So you're going to want a cable that has a mini HDMI port on one side, or you can buy an adapter. I've got links to all this stuff in that written guide. Now, if you want to play multiplayer, then I would recommend getting a Bluetooth controller, and this is my favorite with these devices. It's called the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. This one is designed very similarly to a Super Nintendo controller, but with dual analog sticks as well as shoulders and triggers. To top it off, this is widely compatible. You can use it with a Switch or your phone or even a PC. And the controller is not expensive. It's about $40, $45, so I think it's well worth it. I'm going to show you how to use HDMI and Bluetooth near the end of the video, so we'll get to that later. Another thing to think about are the microSD cards. This is where the operating system and your games are going to reside. And depending on the model that you buy, you may get one of two different types of cards. If your card comes like this, just like a blank generic card with the number 64 on it, this is very cheap and is also likely to fail. When it comes to just moving files back and forth, it'll be fine, but you definitely don't want to flash an operating system on a card like this. So I would recommend to change out this card for something else that's a little bit more reliable. Now, if your card comes with this blue one here, which is from a company called Kioxia, this is actually pretty darn stable and reliable. This company is a sub-brand of Toshiba, and they make some quality stuff, so I don't think that this one is as prone to failure. Now, in terms of getting new cards, then I would recommend either SanDisk or Samsung. And depending on the operating system that you choose and the setup that you want, I would recommend getting a small card for the operating system and then a larger card for your games. In terms of that games card, I would recommend maybe 128 gigs or even 256. You can go higher, but I don't know if you want to have that many games on your device. And some operating systems work best with two cards and some with just a single card. I have that all explained in the written guide. A good quick rule of thumb is that if you're just using the stock operating system, then a single card is fine, but if you're going to use any of the others, I would recommend a dual card setup. Additionally, if your computer does not have an SD card slot, then you may want to get a micro SD card reader like this one. This one is made by a company called Anker, which is really reliable, and it's got two different ports, both for USB-C and USB-A. So this is pretty cool because you can basically plug it into any computer, and it works with micro SD cards and regular SD cards too. Now, these devices will come with a charging cable, but not a charging brick, and so many questions will usually come up about how to charge these devices. So let's do a few tests here with the RG35XX Plus. We're going to start with my charging brick here that has a number of different plugs. So we'll start with a USB-A to USB-C cable like the one that comes with the device. Now, my surge protector actually has a 5-volt 3-amp output to it, so I'm going to plug it directly into that first. And you can see here at the top of the device it's turning orange, which means it is charging. Let's also try it with the charging brick, which has a USB-A port. And yeah, sure enough, this one also charges this way. So really, for the most part, a USB-A to USB-C cable is going to work in a number of different situations. Now we're going to try a USB-C to USB-C cable like you would typically use with a phone. And this is where things can get complicated. We'll start again with the surge protector with that 5-volt 3-amp output. And yeah, sure enough, this one is charging too because it's getting such a low wattage. Now let's try out the ports on my charging brick, which is going to be more standard. And even though each of these USB plugs are giving different wattage, you can see that none of them are being accepted by the Anbernic device. And so I'd say this is pretty typical. You're going to want to use either an older charging brick or maybe just plug it directly into a computer to make sure it's getting the exact wattage it needs. When in doubt, always go with an older plug and cable because those tend to work better. Now let's talk about the stock operating system, which is going to come with the card that's on your device. Now there's two different ways to access your games. There's one called Game Rooms on the far left, and I don't actually recommend using this one at all. Long story short, this used to be the only way that you could launch games, but they updated it later, but they still left this old one. So in general, I just recommend avoiding that first one and going right into the second one, which is called RA Game. And within here, this setup is very similar. You will see a variety of different systems, and then if you click on it, there will be a bunch of games. And the card that comes with your device will be preloaded with a smattering of different games, and it's not totally comprehensive, but you've got quite a few to choose from. Regardless, the idea here is that you can just navigate through, pick your game, then press the A button to launch it. Now, once you're done playing the game, you can press the menu and start button at the same time, which will exit out of your game and bring you back to that same menu. Now, a very important component is called the apps folder, and this is in two different places depending on the version of your firmware. This is using an older version of the firmware, so you can see it's actually within the RA game section. With newer ones, it's in a place called App Center. Either way, I recommend going into this app section. Here, there's a bunch of different things you can change, and some of these are pretty obtuse, but one I recommend checking out is called Quick Shutdown. By default, I think it's now turned on, but just make sure that it's turned on right here. And this is one of my favorite features with the stock operating system. When you're playing a game, all you have to do is just tap on the power button. This is going to save your progress in that game and then shut the device down. Now, the next time that you turn the device on, not only will it boot into that game, but it'll boot right back to where you were when you were playing. And so this is a great way to jump in and out of your games. It takes about 20 seconds to boot the device with the stock operating system. Now, it's not perfect. For example, I found that when you turn it back on, often the screen will be dim. Thankfully, it's very easy to adjust the brightness in the operating system. Just press the menu button and then volume up and down. And the menu button will function as a hotkey. So for example, if you wanted to toggle the frames per second on the screen, you can press menu and X. In a similar way, if you press menu and R2, it will turn on fast forward. So there's a bunch of these different hotkeys, and I've got them all listed out in a spreadsheet on that written guide. Let's talk about a couple other features with the stock operating system. The next is going to be your favorites menu. So the way this works is as you're navigating through the games list, if you find a game that you want to just separate as a favorite, all you have to do is press the start button while you're hovering over it. And you can basically do this with any game and system that you find. Now, when you go to the favorites menu, you're going to see a listing of all those games, but bear in mind that these are all listed in chronological order of when you made them your favorite. So unfortunately, it's not like they're going to be sorted alphabetically. You have to remember when you actually made it your favorite. It's a little bit weird. And if you ever want to remove one of these from the favorites list, just press the start button to unfavorite it again. Another handy feature in the stock operating system is a search function. So you can go within here and then type in any word that you want, and it's going to find every game that contains that word. So if we search for the word duck, you're going to find a bunch of games that have the word duck in them. Darkwing Duck, Duck Hunt, and so on. And then finally, on the very right, you have your settings section. There's a couple things you can change here, like the date and time and your language, but some of these are a little bit more advanced, and we're really just trying to get you up and running. So we're not going to go too far into the details here. I will note that if you want to set up Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, this is where you would go. Now, if you're ever playing a game and it just doesn't seem to run correctly, one of the best things that you can do is press the Y button while hovering over it. This will give you an option of all the different emulators you can run with that specific game. So if there's a game that works better with one emulator over the other, you can test that out here. But I would say that the default recommendations usually work the best anyway. And really, that's about it when it comes to operating the stock operating system. Now let's talk about curating your games list. Say, for example, you don't like the games that they have listed here, there's too many, you want to remove some, or you want to add some of your own. Well, the process for this is actually fairly easy. However, we're going to start talking about like ROMs and BIOS files, and all of those are copyrighted, so I'm not going to be able to tell you where to get them. And unfortunately, finding ROM files on the internet is basically impossible. There is no one good way to do it. It's just one of those great mysteries of the universe where you just basically have to figure it out on your own. But considering the fact that you're watching one of my videos, which means you're a pretty smart cookie, I think you're going to be able to figure it out. Either way, here I am on a Windows computer, and I'm going to plug my microSD card in. And one of the things you'll find when you plug in one of these cards is it might tell you that there's a problem with the drive. What I recommend is just following through all of these prompts. There's nothing wrong with the drive. I've been doing this for years and years at this point, and I've never once seen a time where it says that there was ever an error when they check it. Either way, if you want to get rid of this pop-up, just follow those prompts and you'll be good to go. Now, when you look at the main folder here of your microSD card, there are two folders in particular I want to pay attention to. The first is going to be your BIOS folder. These are going to be all the system files that are necessary to run certain emulators. And the card that comes with your device is populated with all the BIOS files you would ever need. So if you're looking to build a BIOS library, you didn't hear this from me, but you can just copy this to your computer and use it on other devices or other operating systems. Or if you'd like, I've written down the names of all the most common BIOS files in the written guide. So if you want to check that and then find them on your own, you can do that as well. Now, in addition to that BIOS folder, right below it, you'll find the ROMs folder, and this is going to be all of the game files that come on this disk. So you've got a couple options right now. What you could do is just navigate through this and then delete all of the games that you never plan on playing. And so that's one easy way to go about it, just taking out all the games you don't like and then keeping it nice and simple. I've always found that the fewer games that you put on a device, the more apt you are to actually play them. So I do recommend keeping your list kind of trim. So for example, here under the FC folder, which is NES games, you can see there are 432 games. And for me, that's way too many games. I try to keep it to less than 50 for most systems. Now within each of these folders, you'll also find at the top one called Images. Within here is going to be all the box art that you see as you're navigating through your games. I'm going to show you how to change this out as well. So here's how we're going to do it. On the left side are my own collection of games. You can see I have 41 random NES games right here on the left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these on the card instead of the ones that are already there. there. So we'll go into the ROMs folder, then find the FC or NES folder, and I'm going to delete everything, including those images and 432 games. So essentially we're going to be starting over from scratch. So I'm going to move over my 41 games next. And now that we have the games, let's add some fancy box art to them. And to do this, we're going to use a tool called Scraper. This is only available on Windows and Linux right now. So if you're a Mac user, you may just want to keep the images that are already there. Either way, for this example, we're using a Windows machine. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to select download, and then we're going to install this. Now, once you have it downloaded and extracted, you'll find a file called Scraper UI. That's the executable file. We're going to open that up. Initially, it's going to ask you to set up a Screenscraper account. You can go to screenscraper.fr and set up an account if you haven't already. It's free to do so. However, you don't actually have to do this if you don't want to. You can go down to the bottom, say, I don't have an account, I don't want to register, and that you're sure. On the next screen, it's going to download a bunch of resources. This might take a while, upwards of like 10 to 30 minutes. So go grab a snack and drink and then come back. Once you're at this screen, we are now ready to rock. So we're going to select the generic emulation option here on the bottom right. And then on the next screen, it's going to ask you to point to your ROMs folder. So I'm going to go to my USB drive, find the ROMs folder, and then hit OK. Now, it's not going to find every single folder, especially on these Anbernic devices, because some of them are worded really weirdly. For example, NES or Famicom are not showing up here at all. Either way, just scroll through the next parts until you are done. And then this is the main interface. On the left side, you can see that, yeah, we don't have NES listed. If you have a system that isn't listed like this, it's pretty easy to add it. All you have to do is press the plus button on the bottom left. That's going to bring up a bunch of different buttons that you can choose from. We're going to select the one that is NES. It's found within the console section. Now that we have this added, we need to point to where the ROMs actually reside. So in the game ROMs folder section, we're going to navigate to our SD card and then find that FC or Famicom folder. And that's it. Anytime you need to add more systems, this is how you would do it. Okay, now we're ready to start adding the box art. We're going to go into the media tab here on the right. Now I'm going to set up this configuration just for NES, but you could do it for all of them if you'd like as well. First thing I want to do is I'm going to remove this manual thing right here. So I'm going to press this and then the minus button. And that's going to leave us with this 4 images mix, which is actually perfect for what the Anbernic software actually needs. If you try to use like the box art, it's going to squish them down to a 4:3 aspect ratio. So this is the best one that I recommend. Next, we want to resize the image because we don't need it to be very large, given that we only have a 480p display to work with. So I like to resize mine to 300 pixels wide. Now under the output folder, we want to rename this to what the Anbernic software is actually looking for. So we're going to change this to only say the ROM root folder thing, then a slash, and then images, but capital I, MGS. And that's all you have to do. It's going to make the folder and then all of the images within it. And then finally over here in the keep image ratio, make sure this is checked. Now we're ready to actually look through the Nintendo folder and find all the box art. So we're going to go and press the play button, and then it's going to scroll through all those games and then download the box art for each of them. And so this might take a while depending on whether or not you're only scraping one system at a time, or you're doing all of them at once, or if you have lots and lots of games. Either way, it'll let you know when it's done and we can exit out of the app. Now let's go back into the folder and see if it's actually there. And yeah, sure enough, we have the images folder. And if we click on any of these, yeah, we actually got the image there too. So with our NES example, we are now ready to try it out. I'm going to eject the SD card and put it back into the device. So now I'm going to go into the RA games section and scroll down to the FC or Famicom section. And sure enough, yeah, here are the 41 games that I picked, as well as all the box art that we scraped. And essentially that is how you're going to do it. So you're going to want to do that either one system at a time, all the systems at once. It's going to be up to you. If you're a veteran with doing this kind of stuff, it's going to be super easy. But if it's your first time around, then definitely take it one bite at a time. Either way, that's how I would recommend curating your games list and your box art for the stock operating system. However, there are more things that we can do with this operating system. Next, we're going to do the modified stock operating system. This is going to allow us to do many different things. For example, if you wanted to start all over with a brand new card that's more reliable, then you can just install the modified stock from scratch. It's a very simple process. Or if you just want to upgrade the existing card that you have, you can do that as well. Now, I've mentioned it quite a few times already, but I've got a full written guide here that'll walk you through this entire process. It'll even tell you which operating system might be better for you depending on where you are in the whole retro game situation. So if you're brand new to it, I would recommend sticking with stock. And if you're ready to get your toes a little bit wet, then I would recommend doing the modified stock that we're about to do. And of course, there are other options within here as well that you can read about too. Now within the guide, I also list out all the advantages and disadvantages of each of these operating systems. So if you want to read more about each of those, I would recommend doing that. This isn't going to go too far into the weeds about that. I'll probably have to make a different video specifically talking about all the operating system options. Either way, we're going to install modified stock this time around. So let's go to that section and actually install it. And like I mentioned, there are two ways you can do that. You can either install it on a brand new SD card, or you can update your current card. In this example, we're just going to update our current card, the one that we just added those NES games to. So first thing we need to do is go to the GitHub page of this project, and then on the right, you're going to see a link that says releases. We're going to click on that. Now scroll down a bit more and you will find a download link. And right now it's just a Google Drive link. Once you get inside here, you will find different options depending on the device that you have. So just make sure you grab the right folder for whatever device that you're running with. Once you're within here, find the section that says Stock OS Mod. Double click on that. Now within here, you'll find two different options, OS image and update package. The OS image is if you're going to start over from scratch, and the update package is, as you've probably guessed, how you're going to update your card. So this time around, we're going to do the update package, and within that, you can find there's a zip file. We're going to download this. And the file itself will be between 1 and 2 gigs altogether, which is actually a pretty small file size compared to the one that Anbernic tries to get you to download, which is like 48 gigabytes. So this is a great way to save some storage space. Anyway, I've now downloaded that file and I've put it right here on my desktop. Now I'm going to open it up with an app called 7-Zip. If you don't have that installed on your computer already, there will be links for it in my written guide. Now within this update folder, you will find one called ROMs, and within that there's one called apps. And from here, we want to move the contents of this apps folder onto the stock operating system card. So I'm going to plug my old SD card back in, and now under the ROM section, you will find a folder called apps. We're going to open that up. And then I'm going to take the contents of that apps folder that we just downloaded, and I'm going to move them over into the apps folder on our card. You might get a prompt about merging over these new files, and just hit yes for those. Either way, once the files have moved over, we are ready to start the upgrade process. So we're going to eject our microSD card and put it back into our device. Now we want to navigate to wherever our apps folder is. This one is an older version of the stock operating system, so I can find it under the RA games section. Now as we scroll down in the apps section, you will find one that says RG35XX upgrade. And this is the upgrade app that we just moved over from that downloaded file. So press the A button, it'll take a few minutes, but then it's going to ask you whether or not you want to upgrade the application. And you know what to do here. We're going to click on Yeah man, I want to do it. This will also take several minutes to update, but once it's done, it'll let you know to press any key. Now I couldn't find the any key on this device, but I think the A button works just fine, so I'm going to press that. From there, you're going to see a nice, pretty welcome screen, and then it'll also install the app once more. And you'll know it's done once it gets to this menu, which is going to ask whether or not you want to go through each of these apps one by one, or just keep them at the default. Because this is a starter guide, I recommend just keeping them at default, but you can go through them one by one if you'd like as well. Either way, now that we're in the new modded stock operating system, you'll see there have been some updates. For example, this is now a newer version of the OS. If we scroll over to the right, we can see that the apps are now within the App Center. We've also got a couple additional apps as well, like a music player, video player, and even an ebook reader. Now, if we go into the apps section, you will find that there are more apps added to this new updated system. One of them that I want to bring your attention to is called the Theme Manager. You can now change out your themes here. As of making this video, there are only a few different options to choose from, but these are pretty great. So I'm going to pick this one, which I think is called like Coconut or something like that. Once you're ready to install, it'll take a minute, but sure enough, here we are. And I really like the kind of retro wave vibe here, like the purple and pink colors. It just pops a little bit more. Anyway, the entire navigation system is going to be exactly the same as it was, but it just looks a little bit prettier. So anyway, this is how you would update the stock operating system with the new modded version, and I think this one is pretty great. So now that we've talked about the stock operating system and the modified version, let's now talk about a community custom firmware. This one is called KNULLI, which is a fork of Batocera, which is a Linux-based operating system that's been around for several years. And this one has a ton of advantages over the stock operating system, but a couple disadvantages as well. For example, it doesn't have a quick shutdown feature like we saw previously. In addition, the boot time on this can be rather slow. It averages about 25 seconds, but sometimes, I don't know why, it will often take like 45 seconds to boot up. Either way, there are way more positives than negatives with this operating system, so I do recommend considering it. And so now I'm going to show you how to install it and set it up if you'd like. To start, we'll go to the KNULLI wiki page and then go into the installation section. Within there, there's a link to their releases page. You can scroll on here and find the installation package downloads. There are many devices that are supported by KNULLI, so just make sure that you pick the download link that corresponds to your device. Once you have that file downloaded, we need to flash it to a microSD card. I recommend, if you're on Windows, using an app called Rufus. If you're on Mac, I recommend one called Balena Etcher. There are links in the written guide to get you set up. And for this, we're going to use a 2-card setup. So I'm going to use a smaller 16GB card for the OS and then a larger games card for everything else. And I've already put that microSD card into my computer. You can see it listed at the top where it says device, no label, 16GB. So now we need to tell it what to flash. So we're going to press the select button and then navigate to wherever we actually downloaded that file earlier. Once you've chosen that, then press the start button. It's going to ask, do you really want to do this? And you're going to say, yeah, man, I want to do it. From there, it's going to flash the operating system file onto your microSD card. This can take quite some time, like 10-15 minutes. If you haven't already, make sure you go grab a snack and drink because you don't want to be hangry for this next part. Anyway, once it's done, you can close out of your app and then eject the SD card, and then we're going to put it into our device. And if you're going to be using a 2-card setup, I recommend putting in that second card at the same time as well. Now go ahead and start up the device. This will take a couple minutes to get everything set up, and then you'll be greeted with this front page. By default, it might be a little bit dim, but you can adjust the brightness just like you did in the stock firmware. So you press the menu button and then volume up and down. Now, by default, it's going to be playing some background music. You might like that, but I personally would rather not hear it. So we're going to press start to bring up the main menu. Then we're going to go into the sound settings, and then under front end music, we're going to turn this off. Now, as you start scrolling through, you might notice, hey, there are a few games on here. These are freeware games that are loaded up into Batocera. So if you like, you can delete these off the card afterwards, but for now, we're just going to leave them as is. First thing we want to do is make sure that the second SD card is set up to actually store our games. We're going to press start to get back to the main menu, then go down into System Settings. Here, we're going to scroll down to near the bottom to the storage section. And you'll find under storage device, you have a couple options, and one says no name and then a larger SD card size. And that is my 128GB card that I put in earlier. So we're going to select that, but before it can actually be used, we need to restart the device one time. So back in the main menu, we'll go down to Quit and then Restart System. This is going to boot up the device and then also populate that second SD card with a bunch of folders where we can put our games. So once you've restarted back into Batocera, you can now actually close it down. So we're going to press start again, go into quit, and then shut down system. Now we can take out our second SD card and start adding our own game files. Now, one thing I noticed when putting in my second card is sometimes my Windows computer just wouldn't recognize it. And this is a pretty common occurrence, and so let me show you really quickly how to fix this. To start, you want to open an app called Disk Management, which is already pre-installed on every Windows machine. So you can just find it within the Start menu. Now, in the bottom of this window, you can see that it says Disk 1, and that is our SD card right there. It's about 128 gigs. But as you can see, it's not assigned a drive letter, so that's what we need to do. We're going to right-click on the main partition, then select Change Drive and Letter Paths. On the next window, press the Add button, then it's going to ask you to assign the following drive letter. You can change this to whatever you want. I'm just going to leave it in the default D. And after you hit OK, it's going to assign a drive letter, and now you'll be able to see the contents of your card. And sure enough, this looks exactly like you would expect. For example, up top, you have a BIOS folder, so that's where you put your BIOS files. For example, if you grab them from the old SD card, you can now put them here. In addition, within the ROMs folder, you're going to see a bunch of different folders, one for every system. So now let's start adding our games. And again, this is going to be something that you're going to be on your own to do. What I have here on the left is going to be the SD card where I'm going to put all my games. And on the right, I have an external SD drive, which has a bunch of games on it. So you're just going to drag your files over into the corresponding folder. It's pretty intuitive, but make sure to remember that this is European based. And so because of it, some of these things may not make sense if you're from America. For example, it doesn't have a Genesis folder, it has a Mega Drive folder, things like that. In the written guide, I have a link to the Batocera wiki, which will walk you through this entire process if you have any questions. But I think for most people, you'll be able to figure it out. Game Boy games go in the Game Boy folder and so on. Anyway, once you've moved all your games over, eject your SD card and then put it back into your device and then start it up. And so here we are with all the games that I've added to it. However, as you navigate through, you might see there's no pretty box art or anything. We'll add that here in a minute. Before that, I want to show you some of the settings within KNULLI that are pretty awesome. To start, this is capable of Wi-Fi, and I do recommend turning it on because there are a lot of things that rely on an internet connection to really get the most out of this device. So under the network settings section, you will find an option to enable the Wi-Fi, and then once that's turned on, you will see the option to add your SSID and your Wi-Fi password. I'm not going to show you all that stuff because I don't want to show you my password, but you will be able to figure it out. Now let's go line by line through some of the most important settings. We're going to start with the top called Game Settings. Within here, there's a section that says Retro Achievement Settings. And if you're not familiar with these basically work like PlayStation trophies or Xbox achievements, but for retro games. It's very easy to set this up and totally free. So you want to first go to retroachievements.org and make a username and password. Then once you have that, you can add your information right here and then you're logged in. Now, anytime you play a game, if it's capable of earning achievements, you will. Another thing within the game settings that's really cool is autosave and auto-load. If you turn this on, that means that every time you close out of a game, it's going to save where you were, and the next time you start that game, it's going to start you right back up to where you were before as well. And finally, the last thing within game settings that's really important is at the bottom. It says Per System Advanced Configuration. And within here, you can make changes that are going to affect just the one system. So for example, you want to change out the emulator that launches the game, or maybe you want to change out a specific setting for that system, like maybe the shader or whether or not it has autosave and auto-load. You can do all these changes within here. So this allows you a wide range of controls around your specific systems to make sure that everything is curated just the way you want. So as you start to get a little bit more in the weeds with each of your systems, you want to curate them exactly how you want, I would recommend going into this section here. Okay, next we have our controller and Bluetooth settings. If you run into any problems where the games are not controlling as they should, you can remap your controllers here. In addition, this is where you can turn on Bluetooth to connect it to different controllers, which we'll do later in the video, but you can also use Bluetooth audio with these devices too, as long as it has Bluetooth in the device. So all that stuff is found within this section. Next, we have our user interface settings. Here we can change out the themes depending on which ones we've downloaded, and we can do another thing called a screensaver. We'll do that here in a minute. First, I want to show you how to set up your different themes. Once you're connected to the internet, go down to the Updates and Downloads section, and then there's going to be a theme section. Here you can navigate through all the available themes within Batocera and KNULLI, and then download them and then load them up within the UI settings. But just bear in mind that many of these themes are not tailored for a 4:3 screen like on these devices, and so it may not line up perfectly. Personally, I really like the default theme, so I recommend sticking with that unless you want to experiment a little bit more. Okay, below that are the game collection settings. Here you can change out which games you actually want to see in the main menu. And so here's a great way to hide some of the systems that maybe you've decided you aren't going to actually play. Below that, you have your automatic game collections, and there's quite a variety here. So you can have like all your games listed, or just your favorites, or just arcade games, and stuff like that. There's even a setting for games that you've never played before if you want to make sure you're keeping everything fresh. Further down, there's a section called Scraper. You can actually add your media directly on this device over the internet. This is the only operating system that lets you do that right now. By default, it's going to scrape games from Screen Scraper, which I recommend. If you go into the scraper settings, there are a couple changes I recommend. For example, under image source, I like to use Box 2D. That's going to show the box art instead of a screenshot. Also, under preferred region, I like to set mine to the USA, but you can do whatever you'd like. Further down, it's going to ask what other things you want to scrape, and I recommend turning on video because this is going to work with a screensaver that we're going to set up here later. And finally, near the bottom, it's going to ask you for your username and password for your screen scraper account. So if you haven't set one up already, go ahead and do that now. After that, you can back out to the main scraper menu, and at the bottom, it's going to ask you which systems you want to scrape. Now, I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to do one just to speed up the process. So I'm going to scroll through here, go down to the bottom, select none, and then I'm just going to pick one system. Let's do Game Boy. So once I have that selected, I'm going to go down to the bottom, select Scrape Now, and we are going to start scraping this directly on the device. On the top right, you will see that it is scraping the media. It's kind of blocked by like the time as well as like the Wi-Fi signal, but it is working. And it'll give you an indication once it's done, and after that, you just want to refresh emulation stations. We're going to press Start, go into Game Settings, and then we're going to choose Update Games List and then Confirm. It'll take a moment, but after that, if we go into the Game Boy section, which is what we scraped, we can see that we now have box art. And if we hover over a game for a few seconds, the video will start to play as well. And I think that's pretty awesome. So yeah, I would recommend scraping all your other systems. I just did the Game Boy one right now. And after we have everything scraped, we can now use a screensaver, which I really love. So we're going to press Start and then go into User Interface Settings. And now under Screensaver Type, we can change it from dim to random video. Once you do that, there's going to be some more options that'll pop up. And I recommend changing the Show Game Info to Always. That's going to show the name of the game as the video is playing. I also like to turn off the marquee, and then also under Decoration Set Used, change this from Systems to None. And that's it. You can also mute the video audio if you'd like to, so it doesn't play any sounds. So now what you can do is either wait 5 minutes for the screensaver to start, or you can press the Select button and then press A under Launch Screensaver. Now it's going to play through the videos that you have scraped on your device as they correspond to each game. Now, I've already moved over a bunch of arcade games and their videos at the same time, and so that's why you're seeing videos right now from arcade games, but there's going to be some Game Boy ones in here as well. And if you want to toggle to the next movie, all you have to do is just press right on the D-pad and it'll go to the next one. Now, as you're scrolling through, if you happen to find a game that you want to play, you can press the start button and it'll boot the game directly from there. And so I really like this idea of having a curated games list, and then as you're scrolling through, you might find one that really piques your interest. You can press the start button and then just start playing it right then and there. And because we already have like our retro achievements set up, everything's popping up, everything's coming along really well here with KNULLI. And to exit out of a game, it's exactly the same as it was in stock, so just press the menu and start button and it'll boot you back to the main menu. And because we have the autosave and auto load set up, if we try to start up the game again, it's going to load up exactly where we were before. Now, KNULLI does have a quick shutdown, but it doesn't have all the other functions that you may be expecting. All this really does is just power down the system very quickly. It doesn't save your game. It also doesn't load it back up exactly where you were when you turn it back on. So if anything, by pressing menu and power, it's just a handy way to quickly close down a game and your system if you're in a rush. And like I mentioned before, it can take quite some time to boot up KNULLI compared to the other operating systems. For example, here you can see that it took a little bit longer than 27 seconds to get up and running. It's not the end of the world, but I do wish this was a little bit faster. I think this would make me like the operating system even more. Now, one feature that's new with KNULLI compared to Batocera is we now have access to Portmaster. This is an app that allows us to install PC ports of games directly onto the device. To get this going, you want to go into the port section and then select the Install Portmaster option. That's going to boot it up and then basically just kick you right back to the main menu once it's installed. Once you're back in that main menu, go back to the port section and now it'll just say the word Portmaster. So now let's select that. And this will ask you to update the first time around. And so a couple things will happen in the background, but once it's ready, you will see the main menu. And there's a whole website for Portmaster, which will list out all of the hundreds of games that you can install. And there's a couple different categories here. You have just your regular ports, but then also what they call ready to run ports. And ready to run ports means that they are freeware games, which means you can install the entire thing. For a lot of the other ports, you have to install these shell files and then also add your own game data files from an installation that you already have, like from Steam. And so that process can get a little bit complicated, but the ready-to-run ones are pretty great. And so after installing this one ready-to-run game, we can actually exit out of Portmaster, and now if we go into the Portmaster section, you will see it right there. It even adds the box art for you and everything. It's pretty handy. Anyway, it's just a great way to add games directly onto your device over the internet if you would like. Now, adding commercial PC ports is a little bit more of an advanced topic, so I'm going to save that for a different video sometime in the future. But I did just want to show that there are many different games that you can play within Portmaster once you have them set up. And if you go to the Portmaster website, it's going to walk you through that process. It's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. Anyway, there might be some lightweight PC games that you want to play, and it's pretty surprising how many you can actually play here on KNULLI. Now, it's not perfect. There are plenty that won't work on this, but every one that does is a pretty big win for me. And really, that's it in a nutshell when it comes to setting up KNULLI. I don't want to go too far into the details about this. Most of this is covered in the written guides, including how to tailor each of these games for your needs. But as it stands, I think that most of the pre-configurations available within KNULLI are going to work out really well anyway. And I think that's one of the great things about this operating system is that it's made by a team of people who are looking out for those users, who are trying to give them the best experiences possible. And so this is why I think this is probably one of the best custom firmwares to jump into if you're just getting started all around. However, there are a bunch of other options still out there, but there are a couple I want to focus on here as other alternatives, so that's what we're going to do in this next section. And again, I have full instructions for each of these in the written guide linked down below. Okay, we're going to start with this one called MinUI. So this is made to be a very, very simple setup. This is going to be all text-based, and you basically will just navigate through your system, find your game, and then launch it from there. And the great thing about this OS is that it's so simple that it's intuitive. For example, when you start up a game and you're ready to close out of the game, you can actually just press and hold the power button. And that will create a quick save, and then the next time that you power the device on, it's going to go right back to where you were. So it's pretty similar to how it is on the stock operating system, but a lot cleaner looking as well. In addition, it has a universal menu system. If we press the menu button while in a game, you will see the option to make a save state or load a state. And there's also a full options menu within here if you want to get into the weeds. The nice thing is that this is universal across all of the apps that are supported within MinUI. And so I think if you're really trying to keep a very simple gaming experience where the operating system just kind of gets out of your way, then I think that MinUI is an excellent example. The games will also boot up and shut down really quickly, which is great. Now by default, MinUI only supports up to PlayStation 1 and below. However, because MinUI is installed over the stock operating system, people have figured out how to actually run the stock emulators within the MinUI interface. Now, this is a more advanced topic, so again, it's pushed over to the written guide, but if you want to integrate things like Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, it's very easy to do. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds in that you have a very simple user interface, but you can still play the more advanced systems. Just bear in mind that when you start up one of these, like Nintendo 64, it's not going to have that universal menu system, it's just going to default to RetroArch. So all the hotkeys and closing out of your games and whatnot, that's all going to follow the stock operating system protocols as opposed to MinUI. Either way, I think it's still a great option if you want to get a little bit more performance out of your system while keeping the user interface super simple. So that's MinUI in a nutshell, and again, installation instructions are available down below. Okay, the next operating system is going to be muOS, which used to stand for Mustard OS, but I don't think that they use that name anymore. Now this one's a pretty simple looking interface, but is actually very powerful. There are some really neat features to this as well. For example, you can name the folders whatever you would like, and it's still going to allow you to navigate through and then load up your games. And so this is the naming convention that I used myself to make sure that I can navigate through these systems, and I think it works pretty well. In addition, this operating system does support box art, but you can't scrape directly on it. You have to add it manually, but it's just kind of like how you do it with the stock operating system. In addition, there are a bunch of different themes that will change the look and feel of the operating system. There are a bunch that are already pre-installed. You can find it under Configuration, then Theme Picker. However, there are also a ton of different community themes as well, which you can find on their Discord. I've been using this one lately. It's called GBOS, and Zoo from Zoo Reviews is the one that turned me onto it with his video. Either way, I really like the look of this front screen. It looks super retro, which is really neat. Now, the way that you play these games is very intuitive. You just go and pick your system, then pick your game, and then launch it. And in terms of performance, I found that among all the other operating systems, this one usually does the best with the higher-end systems like Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast. So if you're looking for a very simple user interface, but also the best performance that you can find, at least right now, then I would recommend checking out this one. I'd say this operating system is for more advanced users, but if you know your way around the block and you consider yourself a tinkerer, this might be a great fit. In addition, muOS has full Portmaster support as well, including many games that are not supported on KNULLI just yet. And so the list of games that you can choose from is going to be longer, and then even then, when you actually launch a game, it's more apt to actually work. So certain ports, like Stardew Valley, which didn't work on KNULLI, worked just fine here on muOS. I was even able to get my PC port of Celeste working, which was actually set up for like completely other devices, but it still worked here within Portmaster. And I've got a whole written guide on my website for this game in particular if you do want to get it set up. It's a really great match with these devices. So in a nutshell, if you're looking for the best performance and a simple interface and a lot of community involvement, then I think that muOS is a really good choice as well. I had a really hard time choosing between muOS or KNULLI to feature in this video, but I went with KNULLI just because I think it's a little bit more beginner oriented. But that being said, don't sleep on muOS because I think this one is pretty great too. Okay, a couple more things. Let's talk about HDMI support. Now, when it comes to the stock operating system, it is very plug and play. Essentially, once you plug it in, everything's going to work, and it's going to scale everything within the menu to 16:9, so it looks really nice on a TV. However, one thing to keep in mind is that when you actually boot up the game, it also scales it to 16:9 for some reason. That means it's going to stretch out your 4:3 games, and it looks kind of ugly. Thankfully, it's a pretty easy fix. You're just going to press the menu button to get into the RetroArch quick menu, and then back out and go into Settings and then Video. From there, scroll down into Scaling, and then under Aspect Ratio, change it from Core Provided just to 1:1. That's going to give you an aspect ratio that's pretty similar to 4:3. I think it's close enough. And so that's how you're going to play your games in 4:3 on HDMI with the stock operating system. It's pretty easy. Now, HDMI also works with KNULLI, and it probably works the best among all of them. All you have to do is just plug it in, and it'll actually restart Emulation Station and then rescale it to 16:9. And it does this scaling on the fly, which I think is kind of magical when you see it in action. Now, the great thing here too is that when you start up a game that's 4:3, for example, an NES game, it's going to scale it to 4:3. In addition, it's going to give you 16:9 borders on the left and right as well to really immerse you into the gameplay experience. And so I think among all the operating systems, the HDMI function on KNULLI is the best, and the audio works and everything. It's all really good. The only thing to bear in mind is that when you want to exit out of HDMI, the best thing to do is actually close down the system itself while still plugged in. After you shut down your machine, then you can unplug it and everything will work as intended. Now, unfortunately, with muOS, I was not able to get HDMI working. According to their Discord, it's supposed to work, but it's not scaled correctly, and also the audio is not working just yet anyway. However, all the things I tried, which was multiple devices, trying to plug it in while the device was already on, or plugging it in while it was off and then turning the device on, none of that would work for me. However, I know the team has it on their to-do list, so I think this is probably just a matter of time before we actually see HDMI on this operating system. Another weird thing is with MinUI. This one used to work really good with HDMI, but with the latest release, it doesn't seem to be working correctly. When you power on the device with HDMI in, it's going to acknowledge that, but it's not going to output the signal to the TV, and then also it's going to shrink all the text on there as well. So I'm not sure what's going on with this one either. It's probably some sort of bug, either with the OS or with the device, but either way, yes, I think that KNULLI is the best when it comes to HDMI. Now let's talk about Bluetooth. I'm only going to set this up using the stock operating system, but the process is going to be similar for other OSs like KNULLI. First, we're going to turn on our controller into X input mode, which is by pressing Start and X. Then I'm going to turn on the Bluetooth pairing button, and then within the network settings, I'm going to turn on Bluetooth, and then I'm going to scan for devices. And sure enough, right there, I can see the 8-bit DO device, so I'm going to choose that. Now, after you've chosen it, you will see in the top menu a little controller icon and the number 1. That means that one controller is hooked up. You can hook up to like 4 different controllers to this device. Now, by default, the stock operating system is going to treat the controller connected as player 2 and then the actual controller on the device as player 1. And that's great if you are playing a 2-player game. You can just kind of play it like this. However, let's assume that you also want to play as player 1. For example, you have this hooked up to a TV, or maybe you're playing a 1-player game. This is also pretty easy to set up once you're connected via Bluetooth. Just press the menu button to get into RetroArch and then back out to the main menu. Now go into Settings and then Input. Here, just navigate to Port 1 Controls, go inside, and then under Device Index, you will see that it says Dplay Keys. And that's Anbernic's wording for the device itself, so just change that to the controller instead. So once we've changed that to the 8-bit DO SM30 Pro, it's now going to detect that as player 1. However, it's also going to detect it as player 2, so that might screw things up. So go back into the Port 2 controls, and now under Device Index, change this over to the device. Now we've essentially made player 1 and player 2 based on the controller and the device. That means you'll be able to play 1-player games directly on the controller. And that's it. It's a pretty easy setup, and it's even easier on KNULLI, which allows you to actually change that within the main menu without having to start up a game or go into RetroArch. And unfortunately, as I'm making this video, muOS or MinUI, neither of those have Bluetooth controller support. So again, if you want to play with an external controller, then I would recommend those other 2 OS options instead. Okay, pat yourself on the back because you just made it through my RG35XX family starter guide. And I hope this got you up and running with all the very basics when it comes to getting the most out of these devices. Now, as things progress, I'm going to continue to update that written guide, so if there are new features or new operating systems, I will mention them down below. Either way, I do think that this guide is going to stand the test of time, so even if Anbernic releases another device within this line, this setup guide should probably work anyway. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you have any other questions about how to get this stuff set up, or is there other things that you'd like to see in the written guide? As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.